Hi, I'm Jack. Welcome back to my channel and another video. I'm going to be doing a ranking video today for all 5 of the Evil Dead films in the franchise. And as well as that, I'm going to be including somewhat of a short review for Evil Dead Rise. Now, obviously, this isn't a new release anymore. It came out like 6 months ago now. As it was coming out, I kind of ended up wanting to go back and review each of the movies individually and get all my thoughts out before seeing the new one. So it's taken me a while to get round to Rise. But I have seen the film twice now. I'm pretty cemented on my thoughts on it. I do like to give a new release a rewatch. I'm one of those people that tends to get quite excited about a film when it first comes out, and then sometimes on subsequent rewatches my opinion can shift slightly. So I'm pretty sure of my thoughts on it now, ready to review it today. So let's start off my ranking. Let's get into number 5. So in last place for me is going to be Army of Darkness. Now, I don't hate this film. I do still get some enjoyment out of it. But for me, by this third movie, they really decided to go down the full comedy route. And for me personally, slapstick comedy and humour just doesn't really work. It's not what I find funny. And they removed all of the horror out here. So there wasn't really a lot left for me to really enjoy here. I do think the beginning, the first sequence of the film is good. I kind of like how Ash is brought back in here and how his character is developed a little bit more than we've seen in the previous 2 entries. And I do just think at this point as well, Bruce Campbell was just a more accomplished actor here, so you really start to get that charisma that he's known for, and he's very entertaining to watch. So he's easily the best thing about the film, I would say. But when he gets sent off on the mission, though, by that point, when you get sucked into all of these different scenarios and you've got the mini Ashes and everything like that, it's just way too over the top for me, way too slapstick. I just can't get into it, and the movie just starts to drag for me a little bit. But then on top of that as well, towards the end, I'm not as into the medieval setting as the woods, so from that I don't enjoy it as much. But when you get all these fancy elements at the end, when you've got the war between the dead and the living, and I just find that looking at it now, because it was the early 90s, they started to go a little bit ambitious with some of those digital effects, and you really start to see the films age. I feel like whereas you get the original, because they were all practical effects, they just aged a lot better. Some of this stuff in Army of Darkness now towards the end really takes you out of it because of those dated effects. So yeah, overall, I don't hate the movie. I would still just about recommend it. I know a lot of people do really like Army of Darkness, but just for my taste personally, it's not really my thing. So this one easily for me comes in at the bottom. So my number 4, this one is going to be an unpopular pick, because I know a lot of people love this film, but it's going to be Evil Dead 2. Yeah, I know this for a lot of people is actually their favourite. It's a very popular film, did extremely well back in 1987 when it came out, and has been remembered all of those years. And you can definitely see why. I do really enjoy the film. I think Army of Darkness is the only one that I don't particularly enjoy. After that, there's a big jump up to this one. I do genuinely enjoy Evil Dead 2. And I would say as well that the first half of the film is extremely good. When we get Ash on his own in the woods, getting into all of these insane scenarios, trying to escape these cabin and these demons, I love the film. The creativity that's gone into the effects, these completely wild situations, everything like that, everything with his hand becoming obsessed and the chainsaw, and when he goes out to the shed and he's kind of seeing his old girlfriend coming back to talk to him, all of that stuff is amazing, and I just love it. And it kind of concludes that first half concludes where it's that scene in the lounge where all of the ornaments on the wall are talking, like you've got the deer head laughing at him, and it's just utter insanity. I absolutely love all of that. The problem for me with Evil Dead 2, though, is that in the second half, I feel like it really loses steam. It starts to introduce some other characters as well, but it doesn't really flesh them out at all, and they end up just being really annoying for me and just feeling like cannon fodder. When they actually come in, they try to bring a little bit of lore into the story about how this girl's dad knew about the Book of the Dead and whatnot, but it doesn't really bring any interest to the film, to be honest, for me. And I just feel like that point when they arrive at this cabin, everything starts to get a little bit repetitive. negative. So it's kind of a bit of a shame. I don't like that about Evil Dead 2, where towards the end it kind of leaves you on a little bit of a low when the film started so strong. So maybe that's why I have this one a little bit lower, and it could really be interchanged with 3. But if the second half of Evil Dead 2 was as good as the first half, this one would be way higher. Again, still a movie that I really do enjoy, but just comes in lower down than the other entries. So my number 3 choice is going to be Evil Dead Rise, and this was one that I was really excited for. I thought the trailers looked amazing. Obviously, you were having Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell kind of once again being involved in the project, given their creative ideas as producers, and with this new director, Lee Cronin. And everything was set up for success with this film. It really did look good. Coming out of seeing it though twice now, I am a little bit disappointed with it. And don't get me wrong, it's still a film that I really enjoy. As I said, it's up to number 3 on this list. These are all films that I do really like. But I just felt like, because its tone was going for a similar one to the remake, I couldn't help but compare it and felt like it just wasn't as good as that film in so many ways. That being said though, the main things I loved about it, I think at that halfway point when everything kicks off, the second half of the film is amazing. You know, it's a full-on horror film. It's unapologetic about how dark and brutal it's willing to go. I think Alyssa Sutherland playing Ellie, once she becomes possessed, she is absolutely amazing. I think it's quite funny as well, because apparently the actress actually hates horror films and gets really scared by them. So it really will blow you away seeing her performance here and how much she really gets into this role and convinces you, because she is pretty terrifying. I really enjoy watching her. She kind of really does make this film. But yeah, that second half really is intense. A great atmosphere built up. A lot of the insanity at the end. Apparently they use like thousands of gallons of fake blood, and like when you watch this towards the end, you'll be like, wow, I really did get to see all of that being used, which was great. So a very entertaining film. My main issues really with Rise is that, even having seen it twice now, I feel like the development of the characters before everything kicks off isn't great, especially Ellie. And that's kind of one of my biggest problems, is that with Ellie, because she becomes possessed early on, you kind of know where her fate is going. So I feel like at the end, when she's obviously killed, you don't really get that emotional reaction from it, because the film doesn't give you enough reason and time to really care about her. I feel like before she's possessed, I found it quite difficult to connect with the character. You don't really get a feeling of knowing who she really is as this mum who wants to protect her children. You don't really fully get that. So I feel like some of that emotional punch towards the end and some of the impact is lost. I think as well with Beth's a good character. I do really like her. They fleshed her out quite well. But again, you end up comparing her to Mia, where in this one, she's kind of overcoming this story of, she's found out that she's pregnant, she's going to become a mum. And this is a story about her kind of facing up to those challenges that are going to be required becoming a mum. Like when Ellie first gets possessed and they think that she's died and she's really struggling to go out and face the kids. That's some of the kind of challenges this film, the story here, really poses for her. And I do like the way they handle it. But again, I just feel like when you compare it to Mia and her whole dealing with the drug withdrawal and how that kind of intertwined with the story of the Evil Dead that's going on as well, it just doesn't work here quite as well. So yeah, this one, as I said, it's a very enjoyable film. I think from an effects standpoint, as a horror film, it works extremely well. On top of that as well, the opening credits scene with the titles is amazing. Literally for that alone, I was like, I'm going to absolutely love this. That worked really well. But yeah, because of the characters not quite working for me the way I wanted them to, I did feel like by the end, I was a little bit let down by it. And also the fact that this one takes place in the high rise. For some reason, I just don't enjoy that high rise setting as much as I do as the woods. I think when you have woods and you can use effects like fog and everything's slushy and dark and you're just kind of looking out into this wilderness, I just find everything a lot more scary. Whereas kind of in this limited environment, yeah, they do a good job with it, the way it's done. They have a good reason here as well for why they can't leave this building. I do like that, but the setting for me just doesn't work as well for a horror film, I think. So just by default, I felt like I wasn't really going to enjoy it quite as much as I did with the remake. So that's kind of my short review for the film. It's an enjoyable one. I still very much recommend it. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, so I do like it. But I just think when comparing it to the remake especially, it's just nowhere near as good. Number 2 for me is going to be the original Evil Dead. And this is a film now that I've probably seen around 5 times, and it's one that every time I've seen it, it's just gone up and up. I seem to get a little bit more from it every time I watch it. I think because it's just such a bizarre film. You know, it's a very low budget. This was Sam Raimi's first full feature-length film. It's a very low budget. Everything is completely practical, all the effects, everything going on. And I just can't help but find myself taken into this world and just completely intrigued by everything that's going on. I think it sets up an amazing atmosphere. You really do get that kind of like unsettled feeling of what's going on. The effects work makes it look really creepy. I think this is actually maybe the scariest of the 5, just because there's something about when everyone becomes possessed and how it plays out. There is something really that does get under your skin about it. And on top of that as well, because there's so many bizarre things unfolding on screen, I do just kind of like that unpredictability about it. You have no idea where it's going next. You have no idea how it's going to play out. You're just seeing this insane situation, this nightmare playing out. And I love going along for the ride. You know, it's a very short film. I think it's only like 80 minutes or something, so it doesn't go on for too long. But for some reason in my mind, it just sticks with me. It's hard to describe, because I feel like some of the movie's problems with the, you know, you can see there's clear budgetary limitations in the fact that the acting isn't particularly good. Some of the editing isn't great. Some of the effects are a bit wonky now when you look at them. But it doesn't really affect the overall experience for me. It's a film that kind of tends to stay with me. And there's a reason why this set off a massive franchise and has still been talked about even over 40 years later. So it's definitely one that's just grown on me over and over. Over the years, it's just got better. So it's a film now that I really appreciate and love to kind of read the stories about, but it's a very enjoyable experience. I highly recommend this for horror fans and people that enjoy 80s horror. It's a great horror movie, and easily for me, my number 2 spot. So my number 1 choice is going to be the Evil Dead remake. And again, I think this will probably be an unpopular opinion for most people. I'm actually really surprised. If you look at all the critics' ratings for this film, this one comes in at the lowest, or at least equalish with Evil Dead Rise. This one comes in much lower than the original trilogy. And I've never understood that. I genuinely believe this to be one of the best horror films of the past 10 years. And I think everything it's setting out to do with its tone, its story, just works incredibly well. I love here that they kind of decided to kind of intertwine the story of this character overcoming drug withdrawal and mix that with the story of the Evil Dead, because it kind of works as a metaphor. You know, it shows this character of Mia who's being taken out by her friends to overcome drug addiction, kind of go out and sit out the withdrawal, and her symptoms and this nightmare she's going through starts to play out. And it kind of plays out at the same time that the Book of the Dead is opened and all of this demonic stuff starts going on. So the way it plays out together, and how a lot of her friends don't really believe what she's saying. It's really interesting because it creates this kind of really convincing reason as to why none of these characters are quick to leave this situation, whereas usually in horror films, you know, they have to create really contrived reasons as to why characters can't just walk out the door and run away from this scenario they've been stuck in. So I really liked that about this. And I think as well, you're following that character Mia who's going through this, and the actress just does an amazing job of kind of portraying this very disturbed character, and one that by the end you're really on board with. You're really rooting for her. You're really on her side. You want her to escape this situation. So when she overcomes this nightmare at the end, you're really happy for it. It leaves you kind of feeling happy that at least someone good and someone that you really like made it out of this situation alive. I do think as well, as a horror film in general, there's something I prefer, I guess, about going along, especially when it's this dark and brutal and violent. Going along with a group of 20-year-olds in this situation just works better for me than with a family in Evil Dead Rise. I didn't actually just mention this now in my Evil Dead Rise kind of review, is that I think when you have it going to an unbelievably violent and dark level, having it involve children and a family, there is sometimes that line where it starts to cross into just being a little bit unpleasant to watch. Whereas I feel like with the remake, yeah, it does go over the top. It's one of the most violent movies I've ever seen. But when it's just involving kind of 20-year-olds escaping a situation, I find it never feels unpleasant in the same way that sometimes I got that feeling with Evil Dead Rise, I think. So for me, this is just a more rewatchable film and a better experience overall. And just as well, that final sequence where you have Mia in that final showdown with this possessed demon thing, and you know, it's the storm sirens are going off and it's raining blood, and you can see that this character is willing to go through any level of pain to escape this situation. It's unbelievably intense, and that final sequence is simply unmatched by anything else in this franchise or most other horror films. It's an incredibly intense sequence. In terms of cinematography, it just looks amazing, and it was a great way to end the movie. It always leaves me on a high, seeing that final scene and watching that again recently. But I liked it even more than I did the first time, and that's what really cemented it for me as my favourite of all of the Evil Dead films. So that one is an easy number one for me. We've got some interesting horror content coming out over the next month or so. So I plan to do some reviews, deep dives, rankings, and all of that good stuff. So if you've been enjoying my content and you're interested in everything horror related, do please come back and join me for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.